I'm here with Aabesh, and his company is Flora, and I'm super excited because it's been a journey. Even though we've only known each other for a short period of time, I've seen you go through a lot, Aabesh. So thanks for
For
joining
sure.
us. How about you start off? Give us sort of the pitch. I love, the this even has gone through iterations. Your cover slide, smart sensors that save your plants. I love it. I've loved your company right from the beginning. But for everybody who's not on the inside track with us, give us the
Mhm.
scoop. Give us the elevator pitch. Tell us what your company is all about.
Absolutely, man. So you'll probably, you'll resonate and relate to this as many people in your audience. I tried getting into plants a long time ago, multiple times, right? Over and over. And all I would find out is that I would kill every single plant that I touched. And I found this to be true amongst a lot of my friends, amongst my partner, Anna. And it just, there came a point, a breaking point, if you will, where I had my mom gave me this beautiful jasmine plant that she nourished for like, years and years, as any other like green thumb mom does. And she gave it to me, big mistake. And I had one job, which was to take care of it for like a week or two, right? After those 2 weeks, you can obviously guess the mystery ending here. I ended up killing that jasmine plant. I ended up realizing like this was one of those hobbies that just frustrated me to no end because I just couldn't figure it out. There were all these people that had all these beautiful house plants, ranging from cacti to snake plants to everything in between. And I couldn't figure out an easy way to get into it. I was, it's either I was overwhelmed by articles on the internet. There's dozens of articles for each sort of plant. I was overwhelmed by the number of plant apps out there that each and every single one did something different. And then the last thing was I really was looking for just a device that would tell me exactly what to do. This was at the start of quarantine. I was really getting into electronics and DIY, and I was surprised that there weren't any products or gadgets like this that were like a Fitbit for your plants, right? And the more I searched on Amazon and Google, the more I realized, the only solution that was really out there were these like Alibaba, AliExpress knockoff kind of plant sensors that would all stop working within a week. Trust me, I tried like 4 or 5 different ones. They're all the same gadget. I can actually show you right here. This is one of the first ones that I remember buying. And as cool and sleek as it looks, this thing doesn't work. It promises like it'll do all these amazing things with an app, like that it'll hook you up with like lighting, humidity, temperature, all that good stuff. And so, what I decided to do, like any other entrepreneur, was solve my own pain point. So I was getting into, electronics, like I mentioned. I actually ended up MacGyvering my own sort of, just hacky sort of sensor solution. So this was the V1 Flora sensor. This is moisture, a temperature and humidity gauge that probably has stopped working over time. And I basically drummed up like a serverless solution where I would, it's wireless. So I would put it in a plant or soil and it would tell me the absolute like humidity, moisture, and whatnot. And so that was the aha moment where I realized like, the hardware part is cool, but what I feel like is missing from all these other solutions that are being offered in the market is an app and an ecosystem where people are able to easily take the guesswork completely out of your plants. And so that was a year and a half to 2 years ago. I kept prototyping. I kept actually, I really got into development at that point. It was quarantine. I had spare time. I was looking for my next side hustle. And I actually ended up developing my first prototype, like alpha, both electronics hardware prototype as well as an iOS prototype, where I was stumbling over learning my first kind of app for the first time. And so all those things, like all those building blocks and lessons that I learned along the way, allowed me to connect with experts in their field, essentially, because I was seeking out people that, just knew this, back and forth, knew it inside out. And I was lucky to partner up with a hardware agency, IDW, in Merida, Mexico, who I actually got to visit for the first time last month. It was a blast. They're the ones that have brought this to life, if you will. So we went from that to now, past the design for manufacturing product. We have this beautiful kind of Apple-like case. Our entire design methodology has been around, making this like an Apple product, and they've done a phenomenal job. So I can't tell you how excited I was to get this pretty much right around Christmas. And, this was a year and a half in the making. So now we're fully up to production with our first 1,100 units coming out, in March and April. And all this stemmed from me killing my mom's plants and killing my plants. And so, that's where I really realized, like, there's millions of us out there, right? Like, there's hundreds of millions of people out there that have gardening, in like some sense, in terms of a backyard, in terms of lawn care, hundreds of millions of people with at least one house plant, millions of people that are really into, taking care of plants or their mini kind of jungles indoors. And the more I looked, the more I realized this was such a massive opportunity, not only helping people connect with their house plants, but think of the ramifications of a sensor that can be outdoors and connect with, your lawn care and irrigation systems. Think of a sensor that could then enter the agriculture and ag tech market, to where we could help cannabis growers, hemp growers, indoor farmers, because the competition there is so basically crowded and limited in terms of these, like up and coming growers, that a new solution in terms of a SaaS model could really help these players out. So that was a year and a half ago. We've kind of skyrocketed from there. I can sort of dive into those specific numbers, or we could kind of jump back into the deck to go through it kind of frame by frame. But yeah, that about sums up where it all started and where it's gone.
Okay, you drop so many nuggets of wisdom in just that front. Like, we could spend the rest of the time just unpacking your experience. Let me pull some out for the other founders that are going to be listening to this.
Yep.
A lot of the best founder stories happen when founders have their own pain and they try to solve their pain. So you had the pain, you killed a plant that was gifted to you. I never thought about the person giving the plant as well. That's a stakeholder. This is a living thing, right? That
Right.
you're entrusting someone with. I love the way that you describe it, because you really got it just by you saying, I killed the plant. I love it. Right. So
Yeah.
you felt the pain of the problem. Then you used what you knew, you researched potential solutions, you came up dissatisfied and said, let me try and hack something together. So you started hacking your own alpha, which is another hallmark of a great founder, willing to solve their own problem and get in there and say, instead of just putting it on paper and let me go, have someone build it, I'm going to really get into this and learn the industry inside out. So the second point. The third point, you realize this problem was bigger than just you, millions of people, which is going to be, there's a market for this. If you can solve the problem for one person, you, in a satisfactory way, and if millions of people have that problem, now you've got the potential for a startup, not just a DIY, do-it-yourself project to scratch your own
Right.
itch. And then slowly you started developing your own domain expertise. And a year and a half later, you've gone from project to, hey, wait a second, this actually is now a startup. And there you go. Now, so many different things that we can unpack there. But first, let me ask you, so to catch everybody up, too long, did not read, where are you in terms of your funding cycle? Like, talk to me about the configuration of your team, and where are you in terms of funding, and what are your plans?
Yeah, great question. So we, just to kind of give you an update of general timeline. So we launched our iOS app 6-7 months ago. So that's when I'd say Flora really went live, right? Because before then, I would say we were kind of in stealth mode, just building, quietly assembling, like the Avengers team, if you will. And now we really hit the ground running with, our team and what we've developed. And so now we're burning cash, right? So up to date, we've raised 350K and just pre-seed money so far. To give you an idea, before the iOS app even launched, I just raised 100K. And so, for 6 months, I'd say probably around 8 months, I was fully bootstrapped and self-funded. Paying out of pocket, building as much as I could for myself, being as thrifty as possible. And now we're kind of in an accelerated point where, we launched 6-7 months ago, slowly kind of built up, but, slowly isn't what ended up happening. We're now growing essentially 50 to 60% month over month, which is insane. And we were just chatting about this earlier, where Flora's kind of hit an inflection point to where we're basically achieving like a lot of success on the marketing front. We're basically getting free users at this point. All marketing is turning out break even for all new users. Because of that, we're fundraising more. And so we have another 300K that I'm shooting to aim for with this fundraise. And it brings up a good point, because the biggest thing I'm dealing with as a founder is dealing with two interesting ways of fundraising. One is just seeing if I can knock out that 300K with, convertible safes, as like most kind of startup founders do, and startups these days do, or going down the other path where we have enough interest from like VCs and investors to do our first price round, to do our first seed at maybe a 500K minimum. And so there's pros and cons to both, right? With safes, it's a lot harder to raise all that money up front. You either get like a few angels, kind of, assembled here and there, or it just takes longer to find that magical angel that will put up all that money for you. On the other front, 500K for a seed round, you get to partner with hopefully a really solid VC that like leads that way. You get to actually have a lot of traction in PR in terms of your existing investors to be able to say, hey, like this is legit. It's now on paper, like, we're worth this much money. But the downside is that, I mean, this is something I'd love to talk with you about down the road. It's like it usually takes longer. It's a bit more of a hassle. It basically it kind of cements our position in terms of valuation right now. And for at least my thinking is like it basically lengthens the amount of time it would take to get to Series A, essentially. And so
Sure.
my dream goal is, let's knock out the 300K. Let's focus on building up the company as much as possible, making a great product, and then Series A will come, like, hopefully 7 to 8 months down the line.
So many decisions, and founders often realize, wow, like I have so many options, and you can get an analysis paralysis, or really it can be intimidating on what you're going to do. So let's back it up. First investor. Okay. How did that happen? Walk me through, because a lot of founders are going to want to know, like, what did you do? Google? Like, how did you get there with the first investor?
Right. No, great question. I would say, a lot of it, so much is luck, right? Like, so for full context, before Flora, I worked at this startup that probably, it really was the totality of all my startup experience. It's one of the reasons I would say I'm successful today, is because of my experience in that startup. It was something called reverb.com. It's basically an Amazon for musical instruments. So you can go there and buy and sell, guitars, banjos, pianos, you name it. And so I joined pretty early on, probably year 3 or 4 for this startup. And I joined as a sales engineer. I was able to do a lot. It was one of those startups where I, had a lot on my plate. I had a lot of responsibilities. I was able to grow fast. And as a result of that, I was actually able to work with the CEO and the C-suite on some projects. And eventually got to the point where, I really was like egging for more projects, at that level, to the point where I was meeting with the CEO, David Colt, and, getting his advice on like a weekly basis, enough to where I really loved what he was doing, enough to where I was like, I really look up to this guy. I want to do what he's doing in terms of, raising my own startup, like getting my own culture and team together. And, those are just like way far out dreams and like just fantasies at that point. And, fast forward, so I'd worked there for 4 years. I actually left to end up to go work at Microsoft, which was another stroke of luck. I'd been trying to work there for like years, finally gotten in through a couple of interviews. And so jumped to Microsoft and worked there for a year. And so all of Flora's beginnings were sort of moonlighting and being worked on, weekends and weeknights while at Microsoft. And again, that was another stroke of luck where my manager and my management team was incredibly awesome and kind to Microsoft. Like they were, it's rare when you're able to talk to your boss at Microsoft about Flora and your side project, your startup. And so I was truly blessed there. And long story short, while I was working at Microsoft, I realized like, hey, this Flora thing could become real. And so I stayed in touch with David Colt, through Reverb that entire time. And that's where I started kind of formulating like a connection plan of like, hey, I kind of want David to be, my first check. He kind of mentioned way early on, like if I were to do any startups and stuff, to let him know, like he'd love to help. And, I waited, I bided my time. I was a little meticulous about when I would approach him, because a guy like David, like he's super busy, has people approaching him for startups and investments all the damn time. And so I treated this as sort of like my first pitch, if you will. Like, it was, and he's kind of an intimidating guy, right? He knows his shit. He reminds me of a shark from Shark Tank. He's very aggressive with, his domains and what he knows, and in all the right ways. And so I made sure to do my research. I had my pitch ready. I had the functional prototype built and enough in terms of the product and business plan to know what I was gunning for. And so I talked to him and he was super interested. He basically told me, hey, build this up, get the app to a prototype, and I want to be your first check. And so, that was 2 years ago. And I basically hung on to that hope. Like that first meeting, I knew that I had to build this up, and he was going to be my first investor. And so fast forward, that's exactly what I did. Ended up building enough to where he was like, let's do this. Like, what's it going to take for you to quit Microsoft? And he became my first check. So after that, it became easy because he basically set up a deal where he said, hey, I'll invest X if you get a friends and family to match that round. And so out of that, became my first small kind of 100K, pre-seed. And that, basically accelerated the rest of the path. So, at the end of that, I was able to meet with a couple other VCs and angel funds and angel investors, and that kind of just kept it going from there.
Okay, so let's highlight a few things. So investors love investing in founders that can build things. So we don't invest in products or companies, we invest in founders. So the fact that you're able to build, you're holding up your prototypes and everything, super impressive. And investors will also tell you what parameters they need to see. That's the reason getting feedback so great. Get me to this stage and I'll be your first check. Sometimes it pans out, a lot of times it doesn't, but at least it starts a conversation, where to go type thing. And so you get to that point and you're having real conversations, and then that momentum. And it all starts with building relationships. Like, get out there. It's not like you can just Google and then, type in a form online and then find your investor. Building relationships over time is important. So you go from that check, you leave Microsoft, is what I'm hearing. And then you recently went through an accelerator. Tell me about how that came about, what it was like, your overall experience from before, during, and now after.
Yeah. So a lot of these things, it's funny how it shakes out. It's almost like a video game where it's like you use the momentum from like a boost pad to like connect and do the next step. And it's crazy how much of the startup journey is like that. Not only investors, but product and development and all that. And so from DK, once we had enough momentum there and I was building the product, he actually introduced me to Long Jump VC. So I'm sorry if I keep reusing the terms incorrectly here, but they're basically more so like a first check fund with an informal accelerator kind of attached to it.
Gotcha.
And by that, I mean, like, they're super hands-on. Like I basically meet with them every single week. I have a mentor assigned to me. And so that's basically their accelerator program. And so a few months after DK invested, I got in touch with them. I actually didn't make it the first time. Fun fact, Flora's, this was during like the continuous rejection kind of pitch mode where I was rejected dozens of times from, like not only Y Combinator and all these other accelerators, but name any single VC and angel fund around here. And, it was rejection. And so this was when I was pitching Flora as like an ag tech model. Like, hey, here's what we can do if this was in the cannabis, hemp, and indoor, farming space. And they were interested, but they needed more, right? And so I built like we just talked about. And it got to the point where I was like, wait, no, this is my true product market fit. This is what I'm really passionate about, the D2C angle. And so the second time I pitched worked out a lot better. This time I was full-time, into Flora. I left Microsoft and it worked out. So, I went through the program, if you will. It started really recently, actually, in October, like end of October, sort of November, around there. And yeah, that's where we really went all in figuring out like our revenue model and really figuring out what the next couple of months would look like. Because I was sitting there kind of, just in sort of super stress mode, figuring out like, okay, what's our production timeline, or we're not getting enough pre-orders. This was when I was just toying around with like conversion rates and pre-marketing and pre-orders and all that stuff. And it was November, December where I was quietly building Flora Plus and that version of the app. And I realized, hey, like the dream here isn't just to sell pre-orders of these sensors. The dream here is to build the best damn plant app out there and create a community, create like the ultimate, killer app for plants and gardening and, a community version of that. So once we turned like our mindset into that, along with Long Jump's help, that helped kind of unblock a lot and move us forward to our next stage, which was growth and marketing and releasing Flora Plus. So they've been awesome. They've been very hands-on in terms of advisory, and their network has been immensely helpful in terms of that kind of boost pad effect where I'm like skipping and going to like my next referral or next connection or next product and whatnot. So yeah, it's been helpful.
Fantastic. Let's review the principles here.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I like to talk about, because this is one of the strengths I noticed about you very early on as a founder, and I wanted you to really move into your strengths, which is your numbers, which is fantastic. But let's go back. So there are investors that will invest in problem solution fit, and I'm going to use these terms so everybody understands. You go problem solution fit, product market fit, and then you go scale and optimization. And so you're building something, and your first investors and accelerators and will say, man, this founder can build something and seems to know problem solution fit. You know the problem, you've come up with the solution, it's unique, and it works. But then there's the product market fit, where you may have the greatest mousetrap in the world, but if people out there don't have mice in their homes,
Right.
then it's not going to fit. So everything has to come together. So while you're going through this journey, you're constantly turning this puzzle piece to find product market fit. Who is my market? Am I going to go ag tech or, straight to consumer, et cetera? You start to figure it out. Now, let me ask you this. How much easier has it been to have conversations with investors now that you're starting to show that you've got product market fit? You have users. You said 35,000, you're up to 35,000, users,
Yep.
different things. To show that traction, how much easier, how much better are those conversations going with investors and your stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, oh my God, it's night and day, right? Like you're absolutely right in that perspective of, problem solution fit versus product market fit. They're two entirely different conversations, and they're different conversations, right? They're fun and they have like different sides to them. And with product market fit, what I like is that it brings out my numbers side, right? And it's something to where it's grounded in actual truth and reality, and that can be terrifying, right? Because the problem with that too is that the downside is your numbers can be bad, your product market fit could be off. But what I love about the product market fit world for me is that it connects very strongly with my marketing roots, in my paid advertising roots, and my numbers analysis roots. I'll give you an example. So with a lot of the growth that we've had, a lot of it has been determined by us either increasing or decreasing levers on Google ad spend, Apple ad spend, all of that. And everything around those decisions comes back to, are we getting the right type of users? Are we getting users that are, interested in the sensor, interested in the app, actually engaging in our community garden and our like social feed, like all these different factors. And now that we're seeing, revenue coming in through subscriptions, and we're able to see like, hey, these cohorts of users that we were, hypothetically targeting for and A/B testing, like these are the people that stick around. These are the people that are paying for that extra, subscription annually or monthly or whatever. And it just, it gives you so much more confidence to be able to say like, yeah, that it checks out. Like they're paying because we've met their needs and met, their solutions for this problem that they have with either identifying plants or taking care of plants or not having a plant care reminder. So it's been really awesome to have that product market fit before the hardware play. And that's where this business model has been really fun, Ed, is that I knew early on that it was going to be really freaking hard. Like we're not just doing SaaS, we're not just doing hardware, which in and of itself, what they say about hardware, it's like hard for a freaking reason. And they warn every single founder to stay out of it. And so for me to take both SaaS and hardware, and really go down the hardware as a service play without barely any funding, it was a challenge. It was a challenge, man. And so, to get that, just, that approval and admittance of our users saying like, hey, we're going to pay you money for this and give you enough money to offset marketing, like, oh my God, like it's been relieving, humbling, incredibly great to see. The conversations with investors, like you mentioned, are totally different because now we can go to them with numbers, real numbers, and say, hey, we made 8,000 in revenue this month on just Y amount of marketing spend. Here's our conversion rates. Here's our actual numbers. We have a pool of more than 2,000 trials, to take this sample data from, and the entire conversation shifts from like hypotheticals and like what if Flora could do this to, okay, yeah, no, that's super promising. Where are you guys going with that in 6 months? What are you planning to do with that in this or that? And those are really fun conversations because it's one thing to talk about the maybes and the hypotheticals and like the long-term visions, but there's almost a click and a switch in these conversations where investors know like, okay, like they're walking the walk. They're not just talking the talk. They're not just talking about some magical plant sensor in an app or whatever. Like, oh shit, like they have like patents that are pending. They have this, they have that. So, and that took like years, right? Like it was a lot of stealth mode building and a lot of scrappiness, and it's definitely it seems like an overnight success of us getting all these users and stuff, but I feel like all that work and that building and scrappiness is finally paying off, and you can definitely see like the product market fit working out better like over time. And we haven't, by all means, we haven't hit it. We haven't hit the sweet point. We're still testing. We still have no idea where that product market fit, like perfect puzzle piece kind of fits together for the sensors. But we have good ideas, and from that big user base, we're able to make educated guesses and better hypotheticals resulting from it.
Absolutely. There are so many ways to validate your market, validate your assumptions. So you went on and did that. Again, I could gush all day long and I could ask you a million questions to get in your mindset, but let's, for the sake of other people going to watch this, let's take a look about at your pitch deck. How many times do you change your pitch deck?
Question. Oh my God, curious. I change it daily, man. If you look at the edits, I'd say at least 100 times for this pitch deck. I mean, it's one of those things where I actually had to take a break and stop like fiddling around with it because I was making too many changes on a daily basis. But yeah, this is I'd say like the V5 version of this deck. V6 is coming up where I could actually use your help down the line, where I essentially have to plug in all the numbers and all the growth that we're recently seeing, right? So you'll see some of that missing from this pitch deck. So to give context, this pitch deck is typically what I present to interested angel investors and people that know we're seeing good growth, that are more so curious about the hardware piece and the long-term kind of play between the hardware and software. So yeah, we can dive right in.
When you get an introduction or you're sort of cold calling, how are you reaching out to them? How does the introduction, are they attaching the pitch deck ahead of time? Is it a one sheet? Like, how are those introductions happening?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I've been lucky in the sense that a lot of my intros have been kind of bouncing from existing investors, existing contacts. So for example, let's rewind the clock. A year and a half ago, I didn't know anyone. We'll do two different forms of reach outs. One is someone I know. So, DK recommends me to someone. He'll do a quick intro like, hey, X, meet Aabesh. He's doing this. I think it's really cool. You guys should chat. So then I'll reply with just a 2-sentence kind of, reply where I'll say, it's great meeting you, heard great things. Please feel free to grab some time on my Calendly. Highly recommend getting something like that to save the back and forth with investors and just like reduce the friction of setting up a meeting. And then what I do in the second sentence is just say, feel free to check out our pitch deck ahead of time. So it's crazy, man. Like, I feel like a lot of times people say like, you have this notion of like going through this pitch deck over and over again with investors, but a lot of times, about 50% of the time or more, investors in these conversations, like they look up the pitch deck beforehand. And that way our conversation is more about, personal questions, deep diving into specifics from the pitch deck. And it's less of me going through slide by slide and more of like just an authentic, genuine conversation of, hey, they've done the research, whatever. The other play is that if it's a cold call or like, cold email outreach, I first tell them the basics. I tell them, hey, I'm the founder of, Flora. Here's where we're at. It seems like we'd be a good fit in terms of your like angel fund, whatever. And a lot of times I'll choose to exclude that pitch deck depending on just like the connection or how hot our relationship really is. If they're a total rando, I wait till they actually respond to save us time to see if they'd be interested. And then I might follow up with the link to the pitch deck. But typically in those cold conversations, I run through the pitch deck, slide by slide. So I
Right.
feel like the ones where I'm like warmly introduced, it's less of like, the going through slide by slide kind of angle.
You developed an approach and a system that works for you, and which
Right.
is super important. Every founder needs to be comfortable with the way that works, and
Yeah.
lots of tactical nuggets you can pull up from that. All right, so
Right.
I'm going to spin through and I'm going to highlight a few things, and
Yep.
then I got, just a couple more questions for you.
For
But
sure.
so pain point slide, very
Yep.
clear. You put in some serious numbers in there
Hmm.
to explain the pain point. This is what I loved about it. It's not over designed. You got your big headline to catch them, and then you got 3 bullet points supporting. I'm a huge
Yep.
fan of that format. And then again, you explain straightforward. So you took out marketing jargon, all that stuff. It's just straightforward, helps plant owners by acting as a health monitor for your plants. Bolded.
Hmm.
This is the whole Fitbit. It immediately, I don't
Yep.
have to do work to figure out what this is. And you
Right.
got some pictures of the product to know that you're actually building it, and
Hmm.
gain points while tracking your plants and taking care of them. And then you got your supporting features, which is great.
Yep.
And then you have an update, and this is where you are showing your traction. I always
Yep.
recommend, if you have traction, put it higher up in your deck to give people an understanding of how you've progressed. Your
Hmm.
numbers spot on again. And this is even changed from when I looked at it back in the day.
Right.
You're adding your numbers and
Hmm.
features, more numbers in terms of you've demonstrated clearly your total addressable market on
Yep.
how that works. You're showing your math. Another really important thing that I tell people, not, oh, the market is $1 trillion and we captured
Right.
10% of that, we're going to be all gajillionaires. And
And
then
could I
sure.
stop you real quick? I'm so curious about this slide because this slide always boggles my mind with investors because, TAM to me is like, especially if you're an early stage risky startup, it's, and sorry for people that, really put their heart into it. For me, it's like, yes, you should do your research, figure out the TAM for the sake of like, what is the segment or the vertical that you're really striving for. But I don't know about you. I've had so much interesting like experiences with investors that come back to me and say, hey, the TAM's too small, or like, hey, like, you haven't thought about this TAM. And it's like, well, this realistically is more than a $70 billion TAM when you consider lawn care, gardening, all this. But like, I think the last thing I want to do is like size up the market and say like, oh yeah, we're going to get all this money potentially. It's so interesting to me to hear about investors that like, the first question they ask about is like TAM or CAGR, and for me, I don't know about you, but like it almost signals that they might be like, in the wrong stage of investing for my sake. Because for me, it's more about I want the investors that are asking like execution related questions or more curious about like, the product market fit kind of side of things. But yeah, that slide to me is it always threw me off. Even recently, I had investors saying like, hey, like the TAM is too low for me to consider investing. I'm like, really? But it's so curious to me what people's kind of like, thoughts are around that slide.
Yeah, and remember, every investor or fund has their own investment thesis. And so they may
Right.
say we're only going to invest based on this, and they may be at a different stage where, or their exits might look a little different. And so they want to,
Right.
big chunks of the market depending on what their portfolio is. A lot of times you're right. You want the investors who really appreciate the fact that you've done the math and that you know how to address it. And one of the things, and want to point it out, I'm glad you reminded me, is, and for everybody listening, if you listen to Aabesh and how he's talking, he gave us the small idea. So you gave us small, I can save your plants, I can save you, 35 bucks or what have
Hmm.
you. But then the big idea, this is the Internet of Things for all things agriculture. We could get into the industry. So now you have your world changing idea. And that
Right.
is what a lot of investors look for, that founders are capable of going micro. I can solve this problem, and I can make $100 per user, right?
Hmm.
To macro, this will change the world because we're going to naturally progress. And a lot of this conversation will occur out of the TAM, calculations and how you go about it. And you're getting to know your investor. Like, there's a
Right.
way you get to know a lot faster. If they look at it and say, we're not interested in it, don't chase them. Just find the investors that will appreciate and looks like you did, right?
Right. Yep.
So here's the TAM again, your business model, and here is your roadmap. And
Hmm.
we're going to continue on. Okay, you're competitive, so understanding your competition, which is going to be important. And then you got your team, and you don't need a whole bio. You've got just highlights as far as team, your advisors, especially if they're heavy hitting advisors, and that you don't that's the end slide. You don't have your ask in there, unless I'm not scrolling.
Yeah. So that is actually, there's 3 slides that I'm adding in.
Okay,
This is very timely because now that the seed and the pre-seed and where we're at fundraising is evolving, the pitch
gotcha.
deck is going to evolve, right? So there's 3 or 4 slides I got to add in. Almost all of them have to do with numbers and traction. 2 of them will be about actually short-term vision and long-term vision for both the app and the hardware. I think a key piece that, at least personally, I feel like is missing from slide deck is what we're thinking about Flora in the future in terms of like, where could this go, right? For like the big investors, like you're talking about, like in my vision, Flora could be the go-to household brand for anything related to plants or gardening or lawn care, not just starting out with the sensors, but think about the app, think about like being able to buy plants directly from us through in-app purchases. Think like Flora branded grow lights, Flora branded, soil and fertilizing mix, all that good stuff. Not to mention our long-term plays with ag tech and becoming like, really leaning into the sustainability piece to where our Flora sensors can actually help all these growers and farmers save water and water irrigation, which is one of the biggest, resource kind of waste leading to climate change, and, stopping carbon neutrality and whatnot. So there's a lot of pieces where it's like, shoot, like we got to build that into the pitch deck, like take our game to the next level, because now we can talk about it and support it with actual numbers. There's going to be a slide deck kind of running through our recent revenue and conversion traction and Flora Plus. So talking about that. And then, yeah, a slide that I think is missing is like the seed round or specific ask. I've in the past, what I've done is actually customize these pitch decks, which is sort of a useful note that's been super useful for me, is that I make copies of like the official pitch deck link that I sent out. And depending on the investor, if I know like, hey, these guys are like super serious, they're interested in like 100K at X or whatever. I actually, like in the past, I've built out like a slide or two saying like, hey, I'm asking for this. Here's the pie chart of like, the stuff that this money is going to go towards. Here's what that money will take us in terms of milestones. So I got to do that all over again for this new fundraise that we're going through, basically saying like, hey, we're shooting for 300K or whatever. Here's like basically where that money is going to. Here's where that's going to take us. Here's like the next step in terms of like the next round and the next fundraise and how we get to profitability, XYZ. So there are a few missing slides for sure, but yeah, definitely work in progress.
Your deck is in constant iteration, and I love the fact that
Exactly.
you're taking a customized approach, which is sales, fundraising. Like, these are all
Right.
principles, understanding who potentially is writing the check, what they're capable of, and going straight for it, right? So
Yep.
that's fantastic. Okay, so
Yep.
again, we could sit here and talk all day, and someday we will. Someday you and I, we'll get together
Absolutely.
and we'll have a beer over this. But let me
Absolutely.
ask you kind of the final question. If you had to give a piece
Mhm.
of advice, so we've got founders, you're part of founder groups. How long have you been part of founder groups? How long has it been?
Uh, at least a year now. Year, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least
So
maybe a year. Yeah.
you're my longest tenured founder group member there. If you
Nice.
had to give advice to other people sort of in your same situation, they've come to founder groups, and advice personally, advice on how to utilize the network, what advice would you give to the other founders in founder groups who are going to be watching this?
Yeah, I think if I were to go back and do it all over again, I would do it the same way and being focused on building and being scrappy. Period. I think the biggest strength we have these days is the ability for us to just solve our own pain points, right? And as cliche as that is, like honestly, all my big wins have been from investors being like stoked about the fact that we've barely raised any money. We've done all this work, gotten this app to 35,000 users, gotten to full production with basically just using about 200 to 250K, right? And even before that, the reason this has been so successful, in my opinion, is because I wanted to get into the trenches and the weeds of things. Like I wasn't a technical founder before. I was definitely more so focused on like sales and marketing and being like more of a visionary CEO. And then once I really taught myself like coding and even hardware prototyping and all this stuff, like I sucked at it. Don't get me wrong. Like it was one of those things where I had like experts holding my hand throughout the entire journey. Like it allowed me to be able to set up that team for success, right? It allowed me to be in the seat right alongside my, iOS engineers and hardware designers, really being product oriented and product focused. And I think, the number one piece of advice that I just cling on to every single day from David and Dan and a lot of my other advisors is, a lot of this game is a tricky balance between developing a product, pitching, fundraising, talking to investors. And it's really easy to get caught up in funding and the VC world and raising money. And it's super easy to lose sight of what matters even more. And that's the product, right? Figuring out how to build and iterate on the product, which right now our focus is the app. And it's figuring out how do we make our people as happy as possible? How do we get them to stick around? How do we get them, to see this as a magical experience? And how do we build on that? And I think being scrappy early on really allowed for that. And the other piece of that allowed us to stay scrappy in terms of like hiring and our burn rate was offshore like outsourcing. So I've hit a lot of luck and I've had a very methodical approach and a systematic personal approach of, assembling rock star teams from people, ranging from South America, Portugal, India, Ukraine, the UK, like all these different states. Like we're a truly global team. And I see our, freelancers and part-time people as truly a part of the core team. Like a lot of our contractors have been around almost for more than a year. And these are people that now are working full-time gigs for Flora. And, we get the benefit of, saving on costs with the ridiculous like developer rates you might see in the US. And for them, they get above market rate and they're able to work on this project, alongside us. And so that's been a huge helping factor has been being scrappy alongside, these freelancers or part-time people that are also looking for gigs. And so for any startup founders, I would say continue being scrappy, really build on the product, see where you can teach yourself to really get into the trenches and weeds. And I would highly recommend, figuring out a plan and an approach to hiring talent, all over the world and from like Upwork and whatnot. So that's been a huge help for us as well.
Well, I think it was Paul Graham from Y Combinator. He said, you want to be relentlessly resourceful and a formidable founder. And you clearly demonstrated that, Aabesh. So
thank you, man.
thanks for taking the time. I know so many are going to appreciate that and look forward to all the success of Flora in the future. We're going to
appreciate
celebrate.
That.
Let's celebrate together.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Looking forward to a longer chat. And then, I'll keep you posted. We'll definitely be in touch shortly after.